working in the tech field. I'll talk a little bit more about what she does, and Dan is a user experience designer. And those of you who have taken 568, audience engagement through persona development, will be so happy to know that some of the things that you can practice and people actually use in the wild. So we have an agenda-ish, right? The idea is I want to introduce them a little bit more completely, let them talk about what they do, and then we'll define user experience as they think about it professionally, or UX, right? And then we'll let them talk a little bit about the design project, share some of the projects they've been working on. But my goal today is really twofold, right? One of the most common questions that we get asked is, how do I get a job in media psychology? And the problem isn't that media psychology isn't valuable, it's that nobody out there understands the value proposition. So the whole point of this seminar and the class that we're going to be developing from it is to give you all a way of describing the value of media psychology when you're talking about user experience, when you're talking about audience engagement. So you can go into an agency, you can go into a company, you can go into any place where they're looking at audience behaviors and saying, I understand user experience. I'm not a user experience designer, but I'm a psychologist who studies media, and I can explain to you how I can bring value to your team. So that's really one of my goals, is to give you just another arrow in your quiver in terms of how you market yourself. The second is, I really wanted to pick their brains, having come from design school, going through the process of design, to understand how we can design another class based on user experience, integrating positive psychology, call it positive user experience, which I'm sort of pleased and surprised, a little bit disappointed to know I didn't invent, because I know, how depressing is that? Because there's actually people out there doing that and calling it that, trying to integrate the stuff that we study in positive psychology into this design process. So Jerry Lynn and I, as you know, we co-lead the concentration in positive psychology and media, or positive media psychology. And we are going to be working to design a class that's project-based, drawing on these constructs, that has a more design focus, more iterative focus. And it doesn't mean you have to design an app or something. It's really thinking about experience in whatever your end goal is. So Dan Selden, who's currently a senior project designer at Ticketmaster. He just recently joined Ticketmaster, having come from an agency, AMP, is that the name? Yeah. Right, where he was a senior user experience designer. So he's been working with all kinds of consumer products, trying to help them understand the user experience. Before that, he was at NASDAQ, helping them design B2B connections, B2B experience, so that the people who use the NASDAQ platforms could actually get the information out of it that they need. Liz Rutledge, who I call Elizabeth, but I'm the only one in the world. Liz Rutledge is a manager, software and user experience and engineering at Disney, what they're now calling Direct-to-Consumer and International. When she started, it was Disney Interactive, and it's had 3 or 4 names in between. I have a hard time keeping up. What's really interesting to me about what Liz does is that she has a very strong design background, and at the same time, she is an active software engineer. So she's the one that's translating what the designers are inventing, but the designers don't know how to code. She knows how to do both, and so she's done a really good job in helping them translate their intention into application. She'll share some of her projects, but among the other things that she's been instrumental in is managing the new StarWars.com website when they did that release, when Star Wars moved to Disney, and also the Force Awakens website, more or less that. I'm going to let Dan talk now about what he does a little bit, and then we'll let Liz talk about what she does, and then we'll start trying to understand what user experience is.
Sure. So nice to meet everyone. Did we want to go?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. I was going to have you just sort of say your name and sort of your interest in user experience, audience engagement, whatever. Some, none, doesn't matter. Just so they have a sense of where you're coming from. Go ahead.
I'm Eva Maciel, and I'm interested interested in consumer behavior and how that applies to engagement in digital commerce?
I'm Elizabeth Rubicki, and I'm very interested in audience engagement, and I'm not sure in what particular way, but I'm just really interested.
I said that I'm taking audience engagement class right now, so I'm new to all of this.
I'm Sean Tatum, and I like user research. I want to know more, so I'm
My name is Mary Pompanock, and I'm interested in user engagement from the viewpoint as academic. I teach at the State University, as well as really understanding better the learning experience.
I'm Ashley Vargas. I'm in master's program this year. I'm Tara Byers. I'm in my second semester of the PhD program, and I also have a developing interest in user experience.
My name is Asuna Kuku. Very interesting subject with the when I mentioned it to the scholars, so I'm interested in finding out what is interesting.
Hi, I'm Paul T. Carswell, and I'm currently working on my fourth year. And I'm really interested in user experience because I want to look at how audiences are engaged, because I see what thinking that as media changes and as we're moving forward, we're going to really start to really engage the audiences not more so, and actually have them create some things. So just trying to look at where that connection is happening and where it's happening.
And I'm Tanisha Singleton. I actually graduated. I had the realization this morning that this is my 2-year anniversary of graduating from this PhD program. And I have the pleasure of co-teaching Foundations of Media Psychology course with Pam. We've been doing that now for a while. Absolutely love it. Pam was integral into me graduating and was a significant part of my dissertation. And I did because I have had a passion about audience engagement and user experience for a very long time. And my background has been in traditional entertainment predominantly, but as we all know, this landscape has evolved continually now, and so there's more metrics and things I understand from a psychology perspective about how to target certain things. And my passion being in sports and sports entertainment, I've tried to look at it from a data insight and content strategy perspective, where those two align and how can that translate into creating the best fan experience possible. And I think it's really important, and that's something that, as I've been doing a lot of independent consulting now, and I say as PhD in media psychology, I often get like, but that's the first thing, but then it's always some intrigue once we define how we use it, as Pam said, how does that turn an obstacle into an opportunity for certain brands. So this is, I just like to sit sometimes. And I'm a lifelong learner in this space, we all should be attracted to this. So just here to maybe throw in a couple two cents every now and then, and also just sit and absorb it.
Cool. Nice to meet everyone. So yeah, I guess I can.
Put your slide back up.
Yeah. So as Pam mentioned, we kind of came into user experience from the design side, and then a little bit of the kind of coding side as well. In grad school, the focus was really on how technology can augment whatever it is you're doing. So there were a lot of artists, there were lawyers, there were people in kind of about to pivot in their career. But
Economic researchers.
yeah, I was a landscape architect before. But it was all about like figuring out where design and computation and all that stuff kind of had a place in these people's professional lives, I guess. And so a lot of people left the program and kind of entered the tech world as a designer in some capacity. I had been building kind of mom and pop websites for, not a lot of money. But it was enough to like help my way through grad school. And when I first moved out to LA, a friend of mine was starting up work at NASDAQ for this product design team. And so it was kind of like the first opportunity that kind of put my design chops to the test in the digital space beyond just like smaller websites. And product design is a very interesting realm. It's a lot of the things that you engage with on a daily basis, that those are obviously all kind of like B2C experiences. But there's a whole ton of tools and softwares that are all getting digitized now across all industries that really did not get a lot of love from designers. Really old software that if you've ever used, probably super hard to use. And so the B2B kind of product design space kind of became my interest for a while. I jumped to an agency a couple years ago to be much more on the marketing side of things. So that kind of gets actually into we did a lot of work with targeting different audiences and thinking about design and user experience from that perspective. And then I just recently, as in like 2 weeks ago, started up at Ticketmaster doing B2B stuff again. So that's, again, it's like Ticketmaster.com. If anyone's ever bought a ticket, they're giant. And they have a whole kind of fan experience and the website and the consumer experience is very, I've heard I haven't used it too much, but what I'm supporting is the kind of the back end of that process. So it's all the box office managers, it's the promoters, it's artist managers who are using tools to help create events that then go on to Ticketmaster.com. So it's kind of like the behind the scenes.
Well, you were mentioning something just before we came in here about how Ticketmaster's actually changed its approach to.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm still learning a lot about their business, but they, for a long time, the venue was kind of at the heart of everything. And I think recently the venue is more of not necessarily what everything should be funneled through. It's more about working with a ticketing partner and an artist. And so I think Taylor Swift is one of the more notable success stories in this past year, which is they're basically their exclusive ticketing service for her entire tour. So it's less about them working with venues and promoters and things like that, and them working directly with artists. So anyway, hoping to make this as conversational as possible. So if you guys have questions, feel free to jump in and I can let that kind of steer things, but otherwise, turn it over to Liz.
How much backstory do you guys want? So we went to the same grad school, that's where we met. I was an MFA in Design and Technology. I found that because I'd actually previously been working for my dad as an economic researcher. I had gotten into econ originally because I was looking for something at the intersection of sort of like humanities, psychology, and math, science. So econ seems like a decent kind of whatever crossroads. Turns out what I was looking for was actually coding and design, and that kind of sort of like the web design and creative coding realm. So that's what I ended up specializing in. Actually, the exact same friend who was in LA that found him NASDAQ was at Disney when I first moved out. So that's how I ended up there, just in a front-end web development role. It was mostly Disney.com at the time. They kind of baited me there by saying I was going to get to do some creative coding, which took a while to actually happen. I was mostly just, coding like the background color of the page on Disney.com, which is still really fun. So then eventually got to start a creative technology team there, which is sort of, it's more like, I always like to think of it as, like it's Disney, right? Like the website should have some kind of joyful, fun things in it. Like there should be some whimsy, otherwise what's the point? So we make whimsy, basically. So like little interactive things when a movie's released, or little games that kids can engage with, but figuring out how to make those in a way that's not just like a one-off vendor game, which is, you would be surprised how much a game costs. Just like a sad little game that someone just puts on their website, it's insane. So just finding a way to do that where, I have some videos in a second, but yeah, so it's like designing both so that the kids will enjoy the game experience, but also so that producers on the back end of our system can just like program images into it and then they have a game. So instead of having to pay tens of thousands of dollars for a game that it's a black box that you get from a vendor, right? Like and then that's it. Like you can't reuse it. You have to pay them again for something else. This is more just like the framework of a game, and then they can just, all you need to pay them is your own in-house artists to create games. So that's been interesting because it's kind of but there's like probably 3 or 4 different areas where you're kind of designing both for like the developers and the producers and the artists and kids and all that kind of stuff.
A good example of that would be like a game with Finding Nemo or something. And
I
then-
haven't.
Oh, you haven't.
What's
Okay.
that? Yeah.
But then you could just drop in a different Disney or Pixar character and it would still be the same game mechanic, but you don't have to pay for another game.
So are you designing the game mechanics?
Yes. Well, ish. So we find inspiration online and then sort of model things after that. So, but yeah, we're going through and trying to figure out like how do you get the kids actually engaged in the game and like what's too easy, what's too hard. Well, all the Chicks Let Me High flow stuff, but at like a 6-year-old level. So it's a little bit different metric there. But, yeah, and I have a few videos of just like some of the fun stuff we did. So as far as like just the whimsy elements, we did a takeover. This was for The Force Awakens on Disney.com.
Do they have sound?
So when you got to the site, you could choose your sides. You're trying to make them sort of like have more engagement with the movie. We chose the light side just for this example. And then on the light side, this little BB-8 guy comes out that would follow your mouse. Or if you're on your phone, it like moves around, kind of like one of those puzzle things. Or you can choose the dark side and everything changes. They're really just for fun. But I enjoy them. And then this is for Rogue One. This one was less about engagement, more it just was really nerdy and I thought it was fun. Since the whole thing was like, I don't know, breaking into a whatever, it was like the blueprint model. So that's Arabash, the Star Wars language. So all of the text actually semantically accurately prints in Arabash and then translates into English. That was just a fun, silly thing. But we got to actually design come up with the thing and then also code it. Oh, yeah. So then this is an example of what we were talking about with the sort of skeleton. So like this guy here is what we actually code on my team. So it's just blocks. And then we tell the production art team what things are programmable, and we'll always talk with them ahead of time about like what types of things do you think you'd want, what would you use this for, like you need, like this one I think we ended up putting in for that little guy, like you can either make it like fade in and out, because I think the first thing they used it for actually was The Nightmare Before Christmas. So Zero, the dog, was like a ghost, right? They wanted him to be like glowing kind of, so we like put in extra sort of customizable things. That was another one that did well. Beauty in the Books. So yeah, that's just examples of the fun stuff I do. But I have a UX engineering team right now again that is more not B2B. It's
internally.
internal. Yeah, it's like the CMS, right? So it's the people that decide what goes on the page. Content management system. It's like a really jacked up version of, well, in a good way, souped up version of like a WordPress backend. So it's the producers decide what they want to go on the page. They have to go into the system and program it all. So it's huge and has rarely had design help. So right in the middle of picking that apart and trying to figure out how to make it more usable is right now very steep learning curve. It makes you feel stupid until you learn how to do it, and then you're an expert.
Right, yeah, so contrary to.
Yeah, I don't have anything cool to share.
No, okay,
This
well,
would
we
be
have, I think
interactive.
what's up
Okay.
next is a little video about the iterative design process.
Oh, right.
Mom found a video.
Okay, let's stop it and see if I can find the sound.
Yeah, pause it first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically now it's like just an overview of what is UX design or audience experience. Thinking that's
Yeah, this is kind of fun.
it's like a fun metaphor video for it. Seems like a good framework to start with. And then we'll have the actual designer tell you that.
The engineering design process is a lot like making tacos. Here's how. Let's say you've had a long day. Maybe you've gone to class. Maybe you just got off work. Maybe you just finished an intense workout session. It's now 7 o'clock and you're hungry. But you've got friends coming over in half an hour. So what do? You go through the engineering design process. First, you define a problem or need. In this case, the problem is you're hungry and you've got people coming over in half an hour. And they might be hungry too. Next, you do some research to figure out the design requirements and your limitations. So in this case, you assess things like ingredients you have at hand, money you've got to spend, how much time you have before people start showing up, how many people you have to feed, and if any of those people have dietary restrictions. Once you've got a pretty solid list of criteria and constraints, you can start brainstorming ideas for solutions. Maybe you look online at nearby food options. Then, maybe you go to the fridge and you start figuring out what you can make. You weigh your options and you determine making something at home will be cheaper and faster than ordering something online. And you decide everyone likes PB&J, but you don't have gluten-free bread. But you do have corn tortillas.
Guess I'll try PB&J or corn tortillas.
And you make a prototype. You test out and take a bite. It's gross. But you want to make sure it's not just you, so you get others to test it out, like your roommates or family. Everyone agrees, it's gross. You ask questions and determine what's gross about it. In this case, your testers like the tortillas, but not so much the PB&J. So you go back to the kitchen and reassess. This is what engineers call iterating, making changes based on test and user feedback. You realize,
I've got ingredients for tacos. Do
so you start making some veggie tacos. You try them and think,
this is kind of dry.
you have other people try it to get their feedback. Most people agree. It's gonna be dry. So you go back to your kitchen and start iterating again. You find that you've got the ingredients to make guacamole. You make the guac and you add it to the tacos. You test it out and you're like,
This is tasting pretty good.
but some of the other testers think it could use some spice. So you evaluate their feedback, you look in your kitchen, and you realize you don't have anything spicy. That's when you call your friend Sam who's coming over. And you're like,
Hey Sam, can you bring some hot sauce? I'm making tacos.
and Sam's like, sure. Also, I love tacos. It's now 7:30 and your friends start showing up. You tell your friends,
I made tacos if you're hungry. You can have hot sauce if you want.
and then you and your friends eat the tacos. They're like,
These are pretty good. I'm gonna Instagram that.
You should share the recipe online.
so you do. You've solved your hunger problem and engineered a taco party.
Now you want tacos, right? Sadly,
The design
we
problem.
have no,
And-
there's a design problem.
So yes, that's kind of a fun little example of basically what we do in a nutshell.
In the taco show?
In a taco show. I mean, so before going into artifacts, I mean, maybe like, does anyone, like, what does user experience mean to you guys in terms of, do you have kind of an internal definition? Have you heard it used in certain contexts, or?
Reducing friction, so you are
Yeah, UX as a term has also evolved considerably. I mean, like, it means a lot of different things, obviously, but it is user-friendly is definitely one piece of that. But yeah, I mean, anyone else, feel free to chime in as we go through this. So there's a million different kind of processes that people have kind of come up with to help kind of solve a problem. So this is one from, I don't know if anyone knows Frog Design, but they do a lot of work both in software, but also in physical products. So UX most recently is probably best known for helping kind of solve problems in a digital space, but I think user experience as a whole, it often applies to more than just a digital touch point. And so these kind of processes can be used in other contexts. They don't just have to be used for a website or a product or a fun thing at Disney. But I actually have the walkthrough here of this, but
So this is Frog's version of what we just watched, right?
yeah.
It's like a different.
So it's like a way that they use, they've kind of like put it in place so that when you have a problem that you need to tackle, you kind of go through this spiral. And it's a spiral because once you get to the end of synthesis, you can kind of start to identify new problems discover new objectives and then move through the process again. And so in this case, the objectives really are the kind of the 5 W's of who's doing the work, or sorry, who's the design work for, the audience.
Spoiler alert, it's
yeah.
the audience.
What will these audiences be doing? When will they be doing it? Where will they be doing it? And why are they driven to do this? And so that, again, that alone is already touching on a lot of things that psychology touches on. It helps just kind of set you up for success if you know what you're looking for.
So that's like the design problem, right?
Yeah, identifying.
It's like, what's the problem? I'm hungry. I want to have friends over. When are we doing at 7:30?
And so at what point would you then narrow the audience? In other words, who's doing it? How do they determine the who?
So that often comes down to research, and it also just depends on the context for the project. So, I mean, in the case of, you would define at the taco party that your friends are who you're designing for.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be, again, and we'll get to this in artifacts as well. You often, to narrow down your audience, you develop personas that will help kind of guide the work so that you know who exactly it is you're designing for. Yeah, I don't know if that answers.
Oh yeah, no, it was just
Yeah. So then hypothesis, kind of putting the assumptions out there, building a theory, or having a hypothesis.
So would you be then, those would be the hypotheses about the W's?
Yeah, and you want to make sure you're.
Solve the problem, or just about what the problem?
I think it's about how to solve the problem. You can have many assumptions, but obviously you want to validate that against other people's. Something that's where, again, comparing your initial tacos. Having
Yeah, the
try things
hypothesis
out.
was people like PB&J.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so I think that's an important distinction to say. It isn't just a hypothesis about who's the person, it's a hypothesis about the solution to the proposed problem or to get the goal.
Yeah, it's like your best guess. You have to start somewhere. You have to test something the first time.
Right.
Right. And I mean, and this is also just one of many ways of outlining these steps. We have another one after this that we'll show, but the methods are really just laying out what you have available to you. So if you open the fridge, what are the ingredients you're working with? You're going to do quantitative data analysis, do surveys, do interviews with people. There are kind of a wide variety of tools at UX designers' disposal to kind of validate that hypothesis.
And would you create a prototype then? Like the PB&J on a corn tortilla?
Yeah, I think that starts to happen in the conduct part, where that I think is.
Yeah, I guess prototyping would probably be considered one of the methods. Does that sound right? So conducting would be like doing the research, maybe building a prototype.
Yeah, anything that can help you gather feedback. So a prototype is one tool, but a user interview could just also be a tool. Ethnographic research, and then conduct is basically conducting the research, and then synthesis is really figuring out if you can prove or disprove your hypothesis, and if you're successful, you've designed a new feature, a new product, or a new taco. Another one.
And if not, you go right back to number one. Say that didn't quite work. What are the objectives for improving that?
And that's the iteration or the iterative process there. And then here is another one. This one's pretty common. I've seen this used in a lot of places. For a big product company like Ticketmaster, for example, a lot happens in this. They already have products in the market, so they're doing kind of discovery and definition of new problems that they want to solve. And so this kind of like upfront, this first diamond is really like identifying a problem or just exploring an audience, or it could be very, very high level. But it's determining kind of go out before you come in. You're trying to arrive at the definition of a problem that you're ready to solve.
Yeah, the lines are, it's like the breadth of your focus probably. So it's like at that part, you're just trying to get as much material as you can, and then define and start.
Right.
Really.
And then the design kind of production process then begins in the second part, and you can test and refine. That's where you could apply that to a prototype, you could apply that to a finished product that's for a new feature or that sort of. So yeah, so there's a million others. Google has one called the Heart. What's that?
Well, so one of the things that struck me in the literature that you forwarded me, and I put some articles out, you guys, just so that you can, and there should be enough for everyone, and if there isn't one, there's some more over there, but, and they're not, there's no testing. But the idea that with a positive framework, you can move from identifying always a problem to an opportunity, and so I was wondering how much this model constrains people to think about a problem, right? Because that's the semantics, or whether it's interchangeable with an opportunity.
So yeah, I think it's definitely interchangeable. I mean, think about if you're doing market research for a new product. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a problem that exists with something you already have, but it's trying to, if you have a startup idea or something, right. This is really useful for guiding your research in terms of discovery. Right. And it might not include, that's more heavily on the research side in terms of seeing what opportunities exist out in the marketplace or just in your life.
It probably does, though, constrain subconsciously like what designers choose to research, I'd imagine, just because that's the language of design school. It's a design problem and a solution space and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to opportunities for innovation or whatever.
Right. Well, it's easier to identify a problem than to, because the problem is already, is in some sense is defined or existing, whereas an opportunity is still missing.
Right.
But if you think of, just as far as the technical definition of the word problem or whatever, if you just sort of redefine it as a state that is less than where you could be, kind of, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's if the problem is I could have more well-being, it's
right.
It's not really a problem per se, but it's at that point you're just trying to improve their situation, so that could either be from a happy place or actually a problem.
Right, which is consistent with how we think about positive psychology, right? Because it's not just identifying pathology and trying to fix it; it's identifying what's good and making more.
Yeah. So the Google thing ties in nicely to that. Actually, it's again another process or a framework for addressing problems, and they call it the HEART framework because it stands for happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. And so happiness, measuring attitudes around something, kind of understanding for a given feature or product or experience, what are the current perceptions of it and attitudes. So that's tying back to the positive psychology stuff. That also starts to get into a little bit more quantitative stuff sometimes. So engagement, how do you measure the level of engagement? Is that talking?
That's week 2.
Yeah. Or is it looking at analytics on a website or something like that? Adoption, knowing that tends to be more quantitative. Retention. And task is people actually, they're arriving with a goal. Are they actually completing it? Again, for a given feature or insight, this can apply at all scales. I think, so these were basically just processes that people use or frameworks that they use to guide problem solving, but there's a million of them out there. Again, Google has its own kind of methodology. Frog came out, and everyone shares them online, so it's really easy to come across them. If you even go on Medium and just search, design process or UX process, you'll start to find some interesting ways of how different companies and people navigate that process.
They're all really universal too. They obviously were conceived for design, whatever design projects, I guess you would say. But in the last 10 years of design thinking as a thing, and just any other field has really taken off. So it started in design, and it's sort of that's where its foundation is, but it can be used in anything. The idea is just that you're not just picking something and making it. You're trying to collect your research, make something, iterate upon it, improve on it. So it's
And to bring that back to user experience, I mean, I think user experience is about user friendliness, but I think it is also about process. And so a UX designer is often engaged across a much wider variety of process. You know, if you look at this, for example, you're talking about research and strategy and discovery, and those are all skills that are very valuable to a user experience designer. And actually, you know, just in the work that I've done, often we'll have a head of research, and they come from a very different background than head of design or head of product or things like that. So the skill sets that go into that end of the UX spectrum, you can think of it as this spectrum of design.
and increasingly people from psychology fields,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So a lot of you can, again, if you're like researching people's issues with engaging visual content, like having an understanding of that becomes very useful in those discovery and definition phases.
It's all the same research. The words are a little different, but it's like you're still interviewing people, you're still making polls, and all that kind of stuff.
The difference
You can
is
pretty
sometimes
much-
in what the questions that you ask.
Yeah.
You made a comment earlier today, which I thought was really good, because we were looking at some of these models, and Dan said, you know, sometimes it feels a little silly you going out and, you know, you're whipping out your double diamond model or your, you know, 6 points from something model. And he said, but they're actually incredibly valuable to go through the steps because of how it focuses your thinking and how it forces you to articulate things that you maybe are thinking to sort of flesh out the difference with, you know, the rest of your team, which is one of the arguments that we make about persona development. And Dan's gonna, or no, you've got the persona. So one of you has a persona example here. The importance of that because of it's one of those things that is where we have a lot of cognitive bias in who we think our audience is. Because there's this natural tendency to assume that we are the audience, right? And there's a lot of companies that have crashed and burned who believe that, you know, Ford, Kodak, Nokia, Blockbuster, right? Where they didn't innovate because they were trapped in a mental model about who their customer was because of how they value the product, not because they were looking at the market going through these kinds of processes. So these, as Dan said, they can sometimes feel stilted or weird, but they're incredibly valuable once you get over that.
Yeah, sometimes too, and I found this most when I worked in the agency setting, and you're working with clients that have, when you're in a more mature design organization, you tend to follow these kind of frameworks, but working in an agency, every project's different, but it's more important about putting something like this in front of a client who may not have that kind of experience, and it kind of aligns the two parties to kind of tackle the problem together. And it makes, I mean, that's the value add from the agency, is that you're trying to come in and help them think in a different way about that next feature and that next.
And also to not be so impatient and not be like, well, where's the product? It's like, well, we're still in this part of the phase of the design process. So if you don't let us do this, it's not going to be a good product. I can make you a promise about that right now.
Yeah, timeline.
And also, even if the client is totally on board and fine, it's very helpful for instilling a bit more discipline in yourself, because depending upon your personality type, you might really like one of these parts and really find another one tedious. So like when mom is writing things or doing stuff, like loves the discover phase, like so many books, so many papers. But then it's like, then you have a little trouble or redefine. So that we get to that point where like, all right, I guess I need to pare it down and figure out what's actually important. I, on the other hand, find that more tedious after a while. Like I'll collect some stuff. I'm like, all right, that's enough. I want to build something. So it's making sure you go through every step and not just miss something. You're like, oh, I did my research. I found this user. It's fine. No, you need to talk to more people. And at least like close to statistically significant. You can't just wing it. Just like you do in grad school.
No, it isn't.
No, it's not supposed to be like in grad school.
So
I did all of my testing in grad school. I promise. Yes, all 3 people. So if user experience is this spectrum from kind of research through to development, there are a lot of different artifacts that kind of come from that process.
it seems that a lot of you guys have kind of exposure to some of these things, and again, like they may feel silly, but they actually are very useful. So this is a persona that was developed for
the content management system I was telling you guys about.
So internally.
Yeah, so after interviewing a bunch of different people and sort of taking stock who the users were, the team created these personas. This is one of them. So the editor would be, this is a content strategist. So they're deciding what goes on the page. This is this one. But yeah, so like they have to actually go in there and like program stuff, but they're not doing necessarily admin work, or they're not doing the front end development for it. They're not. The data librarian is supposed to be like keeping all of the data organized. Thanks. So yeah, so there's like a handful of these different personas. This is one of them, but all of the metrics change.
But what's really good about this that you probably can't see because you're all sitting so far away, is that they're talking about goals, right? So they can easily edit, they've got robust scheduling, it's an intuitive user interface, but it also addresses the frustrations, such as how long it takes to propagate content, or the bugs in the system, or that the features aren't available on all the screens. So they're really starting to think about the micro level of the user's experience, so that they can not only facilitate goals, but they can alleviate frustrations. And I always think about that, how many times have you heard somebody say, I'm just not good with computers, right? Which is a sort of gross example of these kinds of things, which just means that that person's had bad experience and they've internalized it. And that's a very human response to user experience, is to internalize it, to assume you don't have those skills. So if you can identify these frustrations and you think about that from an identity perspective, right, what you're allowing that person to do is not internalize negative parts of their identity, that you can actually facilitate, self-efficacy, positive identity, and as you know or will learn when you take positive psychology, that the more you increase those positive emotions, the more likely someone is to work productively, to work creatively, to be more resilient when they do hit a stumbling block. So these actually, even though they seem like really small things, can be really important over time.
Yeah, and I think the more between goals and pain points, frustrations and pain points will tend to skew a little bit more towards the emotional end of the spectrum, whereas goals may be really just getting from point A to point B. But the more emotional a persona can be, the better, because you can then tie decisions you're making about what you're trying to solve for them. You can tie it to that emotional impact for the persona and for those users that are reflected by that persona.
It's a lot about, sort of putting an actual face, albeit a fictional one, on a group of people, I guess, because it's really easy to be like, oh, well, editors just need to do this thing, or it's very the cold facts or whatever. Whereas if you were interacting with something and you couldn't, you pressed a button and it didn't work or whatever, you're not saying functionally it didn't work. You're like, that's really pissing me off. I can't believe I can't use this feature right now. What is going on? So I want to be able to think of them their actual reactions to things, and engaging with it, and not just can they, coach them.
Right. Yeah. Which is the whole point of the persona, is that you're stepping out of yourself and into someone else, right? That you're using their lens. And to make the point even further about the emotions, why I agree with you that those are task-oriented goals. But at the end of the day, it makes a difference between someone feels competent or good at their job or not, and how many people are defined by their jobs, by the skill of their job and their sense of competence. So all of these things can ultimately have a big impact on employee morale, right? The willingness to work a little harder, stay late, help on a project, be nice to their colleagues. All of those things can be enhanced, derived from some simple document like this. Yeah. We could say world peace is within grasp.
I think what's cool about personas too, and everyone kind of does them, they all kind of resemble each other in terms of formatting for this kind of thing. Again, like a description of what they do, their goals, their frustrations. But a lot of people will create internal frameworks. So for positive psychology, you follow some of those principles and define those things in a persona often. But the other useful thing about a persona, and this is more just from like the practice end, which is if you talk to 20 people, you'll find 75% kind of follow one set of pain points, similar goals, and maybe 25% don't. And so you create two personas. And between those personas, you can kind of prioritize what makes the most sense, which problems to fix first, those kind of things, instead of trying to blanket it all. So you can, we at Ticketmaster, and I'm just getting up to speed with a lot of it, but we have 17 personas. So for,
wow.
And it takes a lot to parse through those, but they're broken down by percentage of users. So 25% of users fit this persona, and actually within that persona, there's kind of 4 personas. So there's a lot of ways to organize personas, but at the end of the day, it's a great way of just better understanding who you're making these design changes for. Yeah.
Along those lines, I was thinking about if you're working with, like, say, Ticketmaster, and you've got certain groups that listen to certain music, go to certain concerts, and know that you, as a psychologist, you understand that audience. Is that what you're looking for in that area?
Yeah, no, I think that helps. I mean, I think so for the ticket booking experience or the fan experience, I think there's definitely a difference between breaking down like musical tastes from kind of like the goal of booking or attending a concert. There might be similarities in behavior, or there might be differences if you're going to a jazz club versus going to a rock concert at a big arena. I think understanding differences in those audiences are important. I haven't actually looked at their customer personas, but a lot of them revolve more around like someone who enjoy or would rather book a ticket on their phone and use mobile to do it. So that's a persona, because you have about big segment of your audience are mobile users. I think their musical tastes are still an important piece of that, but maybe harder to use to. You might not see as many variations in behavior.
So it's more along how they interact with technology.
I mean, that's one. I think interacting with a product, interacting with a part of an experience, different touch points. It could be technology, it could be
And to your question, what you would do if you were working in that area is that you would try and research that, because, for example, I mean, I think of what Tanisha's interests and the difference between the behavior of an Uber fan or my work with Fox of an Uber movie viewer versus the person that only goes to the movies once or twice a year, right? So there's a different emotional commitment to getting something done, and it's possible, I'm making this up, right? It would be something to test. It would be one of those hypotheses on that circle that an Uber viewer would be less patient about the ticket purchasing process because that's a regular activity and they're going to have expectations, whereas the person who only goes once a year isn't used to the process, so they're sort of finding their way. So they might be a little bit more patient. Now that doesn't mean you should, annoy them, stall them, and do all those things, but it would be a way of thinking about user experience to understand that need relative to the emotional commitment they have to their end goal. So
that could also go either way.
Yeah, no, it could be the other way around, right?
It's like, maybe I'll go today. It's loading too slow. I'll just
go tomorrow, right?
But I think it'd be an interesting layer to learn is if that moviegoer that goes twice a year only goes to horror movies.
Right.
And the one who goes really frequently just sees everything.
Well, and that's the trouble with the Uber viewer with movies is they throw them out when they're looking at the numbers because they'll see anything.
Yeah. But it would be interesting. I mean, part of the research for sure to know demographics and tastes and things like that. It could be kind of relish on the persona, or you could develop it strictly around that for like market research and that kind of stuff.
Which is probably why you said you have 17 looking at all these different levels of fandom and user experience. To your point.
That intersection. Because, for example, at Ticketmaster, if you know that you have a user that is going to horror movies, well, we know that horror movies and comedies, right, are group events, right? So if somebody's buying on Ticketmaster, it's like, send this code to 2 of your friends and they'll get $2 off a ticket or something, because you know that fundamentally that genre is inviting, is a group event. Now, music is largely a group event, so I don't know that would get you anything, but there might be some other way of leveraging the genre into human behavior. And so those would be the kinds of things that, as a media psychologist,
That's super
I know,
valuable to know.
that you guys do that, I know, but as a media psychologist, you can go and you can point out these differences related to human behavior and desire and needs and motivations and affiliation, and I can go on and on, as you know. Anyway, you're the one that should be talking about.
No, it's all, yeah. Hopefully that, it's super valuable to think about those things regardless. Just different ways of
If I understand you correctly, say for instance, now I'm looking for the process of this is an artist open house.
Talk up just a little bit, sometimes I can't quite hear you.
Okay. I'm being interviewed for a job.
Yeah.
I'm interviewed for a job. And the scenario is that I have to figure out to sell this product. This is an artist nobody knows. That is coming to town and maybe will be playing with the headline, but they too have to sell tickets. So now, how, following your design, how then do I sort of develop something around such a product?
like an artist, or I think definitely research, like understanding. In that case, like you might not have a persona or something like that as an artifact, but you would do research on who's likely to like that type of music.
Or like what other artists have they toured with? What types of bands are those? What are their fans like? What types of products are those bands selling? How do they publicize themselves? Triangulate from there, I guess.
Right, yeah, and you would, and that's not a simple answer, because you would go back to this process, right? You would go back to those circles and diamonds and all that stuff, and you would try and go through that, because when you're developing a persona, you actually start with trying to identify the goal and then making assumptions about the audience, and then based upon just what you were sort of making up, like we were sort of speculating, you sort of brainstorm, and then you test it. You go out and you do research.
Yeah.
So you don't just sit in a room all by yourself and decide how to market something. You go through these processes.
Yeah,
right.
And I think that's where you start to kind of identify things like social media channels. How can you leverage the toolkit, the tools that are available to publicists to promote something like that.
We should have a
Different calling, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully, I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, it did in the sense that because I'm thinking in terms of as a media psychologist, how then do I start looking for a job? How do I define my qualities in reference to a specific job? Now it seems like I have to know how to promote the product.
So I think, and again, that scenario, it's kind of like, well, what's the problem? The problem is that artist or that product is unknown. So then why is it unknown? And then you can kind of do the research around that and understand attitudes and behaviors and things like that. And then you move into the next part of the process, which is a hypothesis. Well, I can do something that would change one of those aspects and drive attention or popularity. And then you test it.
The research and the whole thing really, but the research and hypothesis, I would say especially, are super applicable to media psychology, because that's the whole point. Like you're doing the same types of research you would be doing, I assume, sort of when you're studying those principles, but then the hypothesis, like some people make really bad hypotheses. They're just like, well, I talked to all these people, I don't know, and they just think of something they would like. Whereas you guys would be able to actually synthesize that information and like make intelligent hypotheses, which if you can cut a few iteration loops out, like if you have, some people it takes like 5 iterations to get to something that's like decent. Whereas if you can start with that good guess, you're way ahead of the game.
Right, and I think the answer to your question is that there aren't easy answers, right? In other words, you don't just start with marketing a product, right? You start with the discipline. And what we're doing is adding value to the discipline by understanding human beings.
So other artifacts.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so this was, and I didn't make this. This is
Can y'all see any, can you, I'll make the deck available to you.
Yeah.
Wait, get up and
This is an example of an experience map or a journey map. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of kind of exploring these journeys, and an experience map tends to have multiple layers. And so,
Let me just stop you.
oh,
Sit down, welcome. Just to warn you, we are being live streamed. So if you're good with that. These are prospective students.
So the experience map I think normal journey maps really just look at one journey across an experience. You kind of look at the different touch points, decision-making processes that go into those things, emotional states. This one splits it into kind of almost like a persona. I mean, it has pain points along that journey. It also has highlights of that journey. So again, trying to think about the emotional states throughout that. So this one happens to just be a really complex one. It's tied to the persona. And you can see those 4 personas up there are kind of prioritized to some degree. But this is just another example of an artifact that's super helpful in understanding what kind of part of the problem or what touch point you really want to address. Yeah, I haven't actually even.
Right. I think the important thing about this journey map is that it looks, this one doesn't look simple, but it really means that you have to think about every step of the way, every place where someone has this intersection with, whether it's a product or, a service or whatever, and it including talking to their friends or walking by and seeing a sign in the store, hearing somebody talk about it, as well as the obvious, there's an ad or something. So I think it's a chance, like the persona, to really dive deep into what it takes to get from you don't know anything to you actually,
Right.
trigger.
And as a research tool, it's super valuable too, because this is the best guess often. You've talked to 5 people and you put this together based on that. You talk to another 10 and you realize there's actually a little bit more going on here between arriving at an event and entering it. And like maybe there are opportunities and problems to solve in that part of the experience that you didn't originally have in the journey map.
Right, like if you've never been to that venue before, how do you find the door? What's
Or the
signage? Where's the parking? Like stuff like that.
So these can get super granular, as well as stay pretty high level. It really just depends on, the level of understanding you want to get. I mean, obviously for Ticketmaster, this is a very important a journey to understand, because they want to have Ticketmaster be the name you think of at every one of the steps. And have it be a positive relation.
Right, which means that they probably supply maps of the venue.
Yeah, and again, if this persona accesses things via mobile, that's going to be slightly a different set of challenges than a persona who may just have a PDF ticket or a paper ticket.
Yeah, so harder to stream them information.
Yeah. So this is another one that we're working on right now, actually. And this is more internally focused. Any big kind of product really has, this is all actually the product support. Anyone who's in product support for Ticketmaster has a bunch of tasks that they have to do if there's an issue. And so they have tools available to address those issues. So anytime you call a support hotline for a product you use online, you'll get someone like this to help you, reset your password.
Issues across that?
Yeah, so the time is basically, there's a timeline up top, which is kind of like the setup, which is how do you set up a new client in the system. Then there's training, how do you train a new client on the system, and then support, how do you offer that client support and kind of keep that relationship going. The next is the evidence, so like so each one of these steps is basically based on conversations, different pieces of those timelines. So the evidence is like just a simple way of referencing what was pointing to that particular issue or that part of the process. So anyway, like this is a little bit more complex, and this was really just another. We were having a problem, and that support specialists were not able to address, or there were workarounds, or there was something not working for them on the tool that was provided to them. And so understanding all actors, understanding how they communicate, when they communicate, why they communicate, this kind of experience map becomes very useful for that.
So those are different people there?
Yeah, customer service specialist, Ticketmaster support, a client, admins, non-admins. So this one's a little less pretty, but again, it's super useful for us to understand where the problems are occurring and how to identify where to start looking for a solution.
And the pain points are the customers' pain points?
Yeah.
Or is that the door? I mean,
Well, so right, and you could add another layer and say pain points for the CSS, pain points for the TMPS.
Right. So an equivalent would be, what's the process of applying to fielding, right? Who are the people who are behind there's Juliana, and then there's financial aid, and then there's, the media advisor, and then there's a faculty advisor, and who comes in at what point, to solve what, and to identify, is there some place where there's a problem that keeps going, but there's a gap between when they get handed off from one person to another. So a map like this would be very valuable if you were willing to get granular about the process, to find out where the handoffs weren't happening, or where people didn't have the authority to solve something, and so that the customer's sitting on hold while you're running all over looking for your supervisor, or whatever. We actually have that fielding, but because we're perfect, but it's just a more sort of obvious example, since we have no idea what's going on behind it.
It's probably for the best. I mean, the other difference here between these two, this was clearly done by a designer. It's very pretty. It's a great artifact. It's something you can show and put on your website, and that kind of thing. Whereas this is really just much more of a technical document for researchers, and they have the same purpose, but you don't necessarily need to be a designer to use these artifacts and help these discover problems and address them.
Yeah, so really on the emotional path, where it's if you imagine them as a single person, so it's one person who has the best concert experience of their life. One person has the worst day they've ever had.
Yeah.
It's really funny imagining.
Just confused and disoriented the entire time.
Doesn't have cell service, the bathrooms are dirty, can't get an Uber.
Well,
that's a pretty
meanwhile, 3 seats over, this other guy's this is awesome.
But it's better to design for that one than to count on.
But
that
don't
one.
forget the who's ever going to.
Right.
That means
That's
something's
what we
going
don't
right.
Okay, so
Yep.
yeah.
So it looks like is data visualization, is that an important part of this too? So if we go into an interview and we're like, oh, take our research papers and be able to give you a data visualization map, is that your language? I mean, is that a tool?
It's certainly a tool. Again, with some of the people I've worked with, it's a spectrum. And so some people aren't as strong as designers, some people are more analytical, some people are, I think anytime you can bring clarity to data, you should try, and anyone can be a data visual. Anytime you put effort into making the data more understandable, I think that's the skill right there. It doesn't have to be super pretty, but we've been handed an Excel spreadsheet, which is rows of numbers, and it's just impossible to really know where to start. I think it's a good tool to just develop on your own, in terms of because it helps you think about the data too in presentation and how to communicate and articulate well.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get into that too, because it's part of it. So you could either be you have the Excel spreadsheet, you don't know what it is, what's going on in there. So you actually just that's when you graph it, so you can figure out sort of something to grasp to start making hypotheses. It could be that you kind of understand what's going on, but you need a stakeholder's buy-in. So if you can represent it better so that they can understand it, that can be a thing. You can be the data analyst who like knows what's going on, but needs someone's help to make it pretty to get someone to understand what's going on. Like there's a lot of different, like it can be one person or it can be like 5 people working together to sort of figure out what's going on and then who gets someone else.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
It's a lot of different angles.
You don't have to be the database person.
Right.
Often
Like you can be the
you'll
person
be
who
a team.
uses the database to make the hypothesis that then you test.
Right. But I mean, if you're working on a team, you can often work with someone to help them understand and then visualize the data, and it's more collaborative. But I mean, it's certainly one of the tools in the toolkit for a UX designer.
Yeah, and to your point, because we can process image so much quicker than we can process text, which, and I keep including numbers and spreadsheets in that, the ability to translate this information into simple, easy to understand visuals is incredibly valuable. Right? So it's something to be aware of, and I don't know that, I mean, it's why I keep making everybody do a media project every term. Is so that you're forced to translate the content into visual delivery. And so you don't, I mean, speak to this, but in my experience, you don't have all day to explain something to somebody. When you're talking to, you know, your boss or your report or, you know, whatever, they're like, what do you got? And if it's, you know, if you've got, takes more than about 10 minutes and that you haven't made your point, they're like, you know, call me later, you know, talk to the data team, or, right? In other words, they want to know, they want the picture, they want the story, and they want the takeaway. Because they need to know what they're going to do with it before they invest in any time, you know, wallowing about in your data. So it's a tremendously important skill.
And your understanding too of the data and sort of just like the way people interact, either with the data or because of the data, or like indicated by the data, both sides are super valuable, because it's, if you can have a data set that proves that everything you've ever told everyone was right, but if you visualize the wrong part of it, they'll be like, okay, cool. Like Dan likes tacos, what's your point? It's like, no, you don't understand. It's like you have to know what to try to visualize, and then once you figure out what you're trying to show them, the right way to do it. Because sometimes a pie chart is the way you want to do it, sometimes a scatter plot, or like there's so many different ones, and some of them technically it could be showing you this like irrefutable point, but if it's not, if it doesn't click immediately, it's useless. Like you might as well just write a paragraph. Whereas if you have something
which no one will read.
Exactly. Or if you have like some way to make it interactive, so you can show like the transition of like something to something, so they really see the magnitude of like how much something shrank or grew, or that kind of thing.
And
there's a lot of principles on both sides.
Yeah, there's definitely varying levels of fidelity too. So again, this is a database. We had 100 pages of research and transcripts that we were from all our interviews. And this is basically just our way of distilling that down to the few key points we need, so that if I jump onto the project as a newcomer, I can get up to speed really fast with all that research. It's not pretty, you know, it has some icons in it, but like again, compared to this, you don't need to have a design sense for infographic or something like that, as long as you're just communicating the findings in a way that kind of makes sense.
You have really good glasses.
And really good glasses. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think now we're up to sort of some of my, I'll think of them as filler slides on positive psychology. I'm wondering if, I hate to do it right when you guys have gotten here, but we're sort of ready to let everybody take a short break. So, but don't leave or take a break. So why don't we take, it's 2:15, let's come back at 2:30. I can't promise you they're cookies. The cookies were out earlier and that bodes poorly for your chances. The cookies are extraordinarily powerful and popular. You have to know right when they're putting them out. We can blame it on the clinical students. They take
There were also little, like putting in souffle or something.
Really?
Yeah, there's like little chocolate and fruit and stuff.
Wow, that's new. Did everybody who wanted a cookie get one? Because it's 2:30. Hello? Yes, we did. We're back on. Okay, so I just wanted to take a minute and talk about design from a positive psychology perspective. And then what we're going to do is have you divide up into groups of 3 or 4 or whatever works for you. Grab some big pieces of paper. We can't have more than 5 groups because we only have 5 pens. And we're going to have you guys create a customer journey map. So pick an event where you can think about the customer touch points, design this customer journey map, and then each group will have 5 minutes to present it to the rest of the class, and we can talk about, we can look and see, do you remember this? What else could be going on? If you make your map super fast and easy, then you can add the plus and pain points, the high points and the low points. But we'll start with the customer journey map because it's actually a little bit harder than it seems. You all are welcome to be a group, join a group, ignore the groups, whatever you choose to do. And there's articles if you want them. I put them out. Please feel free to take them. They're just sort of background. Positive psychology is extraordinarily important to me for all of the reasons that I've been saying, because we have so many choices in the design decisions that we make, whether it's media content, whether it's media structure, whether it's the things we choose to promote and amplify using the media, and understanding how these constructs can influence emotions, influence people's sense of self, their ability to take action, their resilience. All of these things can make a really big difference, because for those of you who've taken positive psychology and you remember, Barbara Fredrickson has a model that has been empirically validated, showing that there's an upward spiral with positive emotions. The more positive emotions you feel, and I'm not just talking about, whoo, I'm happy, but I'm this sort of the meaning emotions, things that have real value. The more creative you are, the more resilient you are, the more likely you are to take on challenges. And wow, that's so awesome.
February 5th.
Pardon?
February 5th.
February 5th. So, I know, and it's, so it's exciting to have an impact when I see people going out and starting business and doing these great things. And it's exciting to know that people have internalized some of these principles and actually made changes. So as you heard me mention at the beginning, one of my goals is with Jerry Lynn Hogg to develop the follow-on positive psychology class after the intro one, where we're going to be very design-based, project-based, which is not to say you have, thing-based, but experience-based, so that it's really following some of these models that these guys have been talking about, where you're identifying a problem or an opportunity and you're going through an iterative process, you're providing each other with feedback, you're going back, making changes. But when you're thinking about design, as I mentioned, the psychology initially was a medical model, looked at what was wrong. Positive psychology started saying, hey, let's look at what's right, make more of it. So if you're looking at positive design, you're looking at creating possibilities, not just solving problems. Now, there's not anything with viewing something as a problem as long as you don't get stuck in that bias. As long as you can think of it as creating a possibility, where you're making design decisions that support human flourishing and growth, positive expansion of self, right? Whether that's individual relationships with yourself, with others, or with your community, where the choices that you're making are really enabling meaningful activities, right? There's 2 kinds of happiness: hedonic, right, because it feels good, and eudaimonic, where you have great meaning and it adds greater well-being to your life, in fact, than hedonic pleasure. So they're thinking about, is it possible to create long-standing meaning with what we're designing? That could just come from people feeling more competent or more able to take action. Or maybe it's self-knowledge. There are lots of ways of doing it, but by thinking about these things as part of the design process, increasing that awareness and that intentionality, it increases the opportunities and the possibilities that you'll be able to do so. Some of these may be redundant to what I just said, but basically you're embracing rich, lasting experiences. And the other is that you're accepting the responsibility for the choices that you make, both short-term and long-term. Because there are an awful lot of things that get designed where maybe it isn't exactly, ticking the boxes on those other things. But if we have awareness and we're willing to accept responsibility for our choices, it will be much easier to shift our point of view and to shift what we're doing. So that's my soapbox for today. If you're interested in a class like that, please, shoot me an email or drop me a note or let me know, just so that we have some sense of how hard and quickly to try and get it online, because we teach a lot and it's really will be more than our load to do that, but it's something that we're so passionate about, we're pretty committed. Okay, so now I'm gonna have you guys divide in groups, however you want to do it. Come up, grab a piece of paper, and take one of the pens that are there, and among yourselves, pick some kind of event that has a customer journey. You saw Dan's example of the customer journey map to a concert. It could be you had some examples, buying your granddaughter a present. Enrolling at Fielding, right? I mean, and those are really important.
Booking a trip.
That's right, booking a trip, deciding where to go, any of those kinds of things, or something that completely different. But just decide within your group and start mapping out that customer journey. If you need 2 pieces of paper because you start and then you figure out that there were 6 things that should have happened before you got to point 2, get another piece of paper. We're going to give you guys 15 minutes of work time, so 5 minutes to get groups and paper, and then 15 minutes, and then we'll give you, each group will have 5 minutes to present. And Dan and Elizabeth will be walking around sharing their expertise while you're doing it. So have at.
Don't feel constrained to either physical or digital space. Could be anything.
And like the ones we showed, think of emotional states, think of touch points, think about how to organize those as different layers.
Yeah, but start with physical and then work your way into the emotional. Are you not playing?
I remember this is what I thought about
I just remembered that.